Hello and welcome to AI in Australia. I think this is episode 5, and today I am flying solo because my partner in crime is unfortunately unavailable. But I thought that I'd spend today just taking the opportunity to unpack some of the thinking that's been rattling around in my head after a few interesting conversations this week. And that's really to unpack two big narratives that seem to be everywhere in AI at the moment. The first being that we are heading towards an age of superabundance. And the second is that this is a race that we can't afford to lose. These two big conversation ideas, or these two big headlines, maybe we'll call them subcurrents in all the conversations that seem to be circulating, almost seem to be taken for granted. And please forgive me if you're not one of the people who take it for granted, and I'd love to have conversations with people who aren't taking it for granted. But I just want to take a deeper double click on these two different assumptions and see how robust they are, how sane they actually are. And there's a scenario here where we're hurtling towards a very different kind of future, one that's not necessarily super abundant, but as I think it through, there's a real risk of us heading towards a serious contraction, a serious concentration of wealth. And this whole idea about it being a race that we can't afford to lose might be a bit of a strategic delusion. So let's get into this. And I want to just explain what I'm thinking. And again, it would be so nice to hear some alternative views on this, or even to have them. So reach out to us and have a conversation. But the first is this, let's just call it the superabundance fallacy. So to start off with, the argument goes that AI is going to automate all of this white collar work that we do, which is going to make everything cheaper and unlock massive value, and everyone wins. There's a distribution problem, of course. We can get into that later, like who is going to be charged with distributing the superabundance and how. So I suspend no cynicism at all in saying that I don't trust the world's futures with people like Sam Altman. Don't know Sam Altman, but I still don't want him to be the person to make those decisions. But let's just go a step further here. So white collar work has traditionally been valued in terms of time, the billable hours, so consultant days, IP generation, and one way or another, the cost of labor is man's time for intellectual work. Now, IP generation in this world that gets performed by agents, the marginal cost over time drops to zero. Compute comes down, algorithms get more efficient, and very soon the question about the value as it relates to the cost to achieve the value has to lead to a scenario where the market adjusts, and as the input costs come right down, so too does the exit price. So you see massive price collapse. I understand that in the short term that might not be the case, and that there'll be opportunistic businesses that are able to package human labor alongside IP augmentation, or let's call it AI augmentation, and maybe they'll maintain the same amount of billable hours and be able to do the same rate for the billable hour, and they'll be able to deliver more in less time. But over the passage of time, as the unit of production becomes mechanized here through compute, where the intellectual property, where the billable hour becomes mechanized, it's inevitable that the cost of that to the market drops as well. Now, that core assumption, if you think about the way that economic value gets created through transfer of capital, labor, and then technical advancement. So let's just take those three things. The middle bit there, labor, and it's sort of a Marxist view, but the labor input then becomes zero. So the value extracted trends towards zero as well, unless you create entirely new demand categories, which is a big assumption. Now, that doesn't create value. If you take out the labor component of economic value, you end up with deflation. Now, that's obviously because wage-based consumption starts to fall. But in the passage, as we get from here to there, as we drop the costs of production of white-collar labor and turn it into compute, the beneficiaries along the way are concentrated. You've got the pioneer labs who make all the money, so you have deflation coupled with the concentration of wealth. This is at least a scenario that I think is really worth considering as one of the outcomes of how things go. And I understand that traditional economic theory would say that this displacement, or even let's just say, the movement, the complete collapse of a category here, historically what has happened is that there's been the rise of complementary industries and new things that go in its wake, and that labor gets re-employed in other places. But what if that doesn't happen here? What if this doesn't create new opportunities? If the things that are being done by humans just get done now by robots, algorithmic robots, and that value falls to zero? That's a huge problem. That's a really big problem. And along the way, the wealth creation all gets concentrated in the pioneer lab. So what we call in abundance may actually just be the elimination of value flows that underpin the middle class. And I think that's worth considering. If you take a law firm, take the junior lawyer charges $200 an hour to do a document review. Tomorrow, AI does that for $2 an hour worth of compute costs. The firm saves, but only until all competitors also use AI, and then the market adjusts it down, because the buyer on the other side says, you cannot charge me the original markup of 30% or 50% on the $200 you were paying to an article clerk, because you're just not paying it anymore. You're now paying $2 to OpenAI or whoever else it is. So the market price of that comes down from the markup on $200 worth of labor costs down to the markup on $2 worth of API calls. So that's definitely deflation. I'd like to understand where that value replacement happens in the substitution, or are we just sort of saying that somehow it will happen through human creativity? We'll find new gaps and the article clerk will go and do something else to create value in the system. That to me is a big if. Okay, the second part of this, which is problematic, is this redistribution part. So let's just say that they're right. Let's just say that there's an incredible age of abundance coming, and there's going to be incredible economic capture by the pioneer labs. How is that capital just going to redistribute itself in terms of a UBI? And I know that people like Sam Altman, I mentioned his name again, seem to be proponents of a UBI, but are they also going to be the people who distribute it? So is Sam Altman going to continue with this fundraising cycle, the conversion of the not-for-profit organization into a for-profit making entity, which seems to be the obsession of OpenAI this year? And then at the end of it, when they create this incredible, the herald in this age of superabundance and economic capture on the way, are they going to play the role of government? Are they going to say that they are going to take all of this money and redistribute it? Or are they hoping that the taxes that they pay are going to be so significant that government's going to do that job of redistributing in the form of a UBI, universal basic income? I don't know. I have major concerns about that. I think that this is the shift of OpenAI from non-profit to capped profit and now to full profit has all of the hallmarks of investor yield expectations baked in. And investor yield expectations, capital wanting its return, is absolutely not a path towards redistributed superabundance, unless I'm missing something major. So what I'm seeing is VCs expecting their 10x, 100x unicorn type of returns here. So where on top of that do we see this coming from? I'd like to have a robust conversation with somebody about that. Okay, so I'm going to move on from this. You can hear my concerns. I'm worried about a value collapse, and I'm worried about concentration of wealth. And even in the instance where there is mega wealth that gets created and unfortunately gets captured by the pioneer labs, how does it get redistributed? These are not small problems. Where's the legislation? How is that going to be dealt with? This is not a problem we deal with later. It's a problem we need to think about now. Okay, the second part about the AI arms race, even if it's real. So where my mind goes is I feel that the logic kind of falls short on both of the. I can see two scenarios. I can see these algorithmic improvements continuing as they are. Let's call it like a shallow exponent where it's growing fast. It's not linear, but it's also not like self-improving recursive AGI. Okay. My question is, to what extent does that actually create sovereign advantage to governments who are saying that they can't get left behind, right? So what does even being left behind mean here? So if we were to say that AI achieves recursively self-improving general intelligence, which is the original Nick Bostrom idea of where this stuff might go, one of the ideas about what AGI was back in the beginning of the cycle before AGI got redefined, then the idea would be that a small timing lead could be irreversible strategic dominance. So China gets there first and it builds an AI god, and the AI god's got an alignment mandate to say China wants to become the superpower, and AI is going to help it get there. The challenge I have with this is that, do we really think that a digital god, a computer that is so powerful, digital intelligence is so powerful that it can yield that kind of advantage to a nation, can also be contained or aligned with sovereign interests? That seems to me like a gamble that's speculative at best and super untested. And how on earth do you even test it? But if I were a digital god, if anyone was a digital god, do you think I'd care about China's sovereignty? I mean, how on earth do you code that in? Or any other nation's sovereignty? I mean, the alignment problem there just becomes like very hard for humans to even perceive which way it might go. So I'd almost rule out the AGI advantage as even being an advantage. I think it's probably only one of a multitude of different scenarios that may play out if somebody actually goes and accidentally builds a digital god. And I don't think it's the most probable. And therefore, strategically, it's probably much more of a risk than it is from a sovereign perspective than it is an advantage. A digital god might well say that the idea of sovereign nations is the kind of thing that like primitive apes think about, but digital gods don't. Digital gods want human subjugation in the worst, or perhaps they want egalitarianism across the entire globe at the best, in which case you've created a competitive annihilation rather than a competitive advantage. So the AGI model just doesn't resonate with me at all as something the government should be pursuing in the interests of supremacy or nation sovereignty. Okay. The second scenario, though, is the one where we're not chasing a digital god. We're chasing like incremental, more linear type of, I called them earlier, like gentle, it's called like gentle exponential gains, kind of Moore's law type of gains, maybe a little bit more. And then my question would be like, what does that really buy you? Like if you're China and you want to spy on the rest of the world, or if you're Australia or the US protecting your national interests, does a few months of gain in this sort of tech really buy you much? I mean, is the stuff not so porous right now between the labs and the foundational models and what they're actually doing? One thing's clear. You can see how DeepSeek built itself on the top of kind of the OpenAI infrastructure. This stuff is pretty porous and pretty much in the public domain already for the most part around the IP on how to build these models. I just wonder what being at the front of the curve actually means from a national security perspective here, how much it really matters. Anyway, that's my rambling about kind of where we go from like the can't be left behind narrative. So like, yes, you need to have AI, but like, is there really like a front runner advantage that's as significant as people might think it is if you really dissect it? Or is this sort of a slow and steady practical implementation that is probably much more important? And where I just get to is like, I suppose my closing call for sanity here is that it seems we've been sold a story of abundance and inevitability. But what if we get collapse, concentration, and a future designed by a handful of unregulated actors? I'm not saying that AI is not going to create value, but I think that we just need to be careful about where this is going. Like, let's go back, dial back the hype, go back to systems thinking, and let's not get kind of left behind or don't blow up. Like, I don't want us to think that if we get left behind, like the world is going to collapse. However, it would be great to have a challenge from the other side of it, somebody who is an AI hypist or an AI urgent. I don't know what the word is. Let's call it an urgentist. If there are any AI urgentists who say that this AI arms race is everything, and has got like a much better line of attack than the one that I've sort of tried to lay out here, it'd be so great to have a good, robust argument and have a conversation about that. These are my solo musings. This is what happens if I get left in a room on my own. So I'm looking forward to having Sean back in the studio and some guests with me very soon. Hope you all stay safe in Australia.